Icebergs are great if they don't fall victim to climate change or are busy sinking unsinkable ships. Polar bears can make their home on them, and they are a great metaphor for interpersonal communication. And today we'll take a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung, and today I'd like to present to you the iceberg model. More precisely, we should better speak about the iceberg metaphor, because there is no such thing as the iceberg model. The metaphor has been used by different people in different areas. The basic idea is always the same. If you look at an iceberg drifting by, what you actually see is the tip of the iceberg. And that is actually a very small part of it. The biggest part is hidden underwater. So this image of the iceberg is used for situations where we only see a small fraction of the whole and the biggest part remains hidden. We could, for example, apply this metaphor to meeting a new person. We see this person's outward appearance, but we know nothing about their thoughts and feelings and wishes and hopes and dreams and anxieties and whatever. And we see their behavior towards us in this specific situation. We don't know anything about how this person will act in other situations or towards other people. So we only see a very small fraction of this person, and most remains hidden. There is another somewhat similar concept that sometimes gets mixed up with this iceberg metaphor, and that is the Pareto principle. There will probably be another video about the Pareto principle in the future, so let me just introduce it briefly. The basic idea for the Pareto principle is that a small fraction of something, a small fraction of your input, 20% to be exact, to be precise, make up for a major part of the result, 80%. For example, think of an online shop. In an online shop, a small fraction of the orders probably makes up for a major part of the profit. For example, imagine one customer who orders a state-of-the-art great big television plus the corresponding home cinema equipment plus the newest game console and a lot of accessories. That one person with this one order generates as much profit as 1,000 customers who merely order a book for a few bucks or another very small and cheap item. So, as you see, there are some similarities. We also have this small part and big part idea. However, it takes an entirely different direction, so it is important to clearly distinguish between those. So, where does this iceberg idea come from? It seems the first one to use it was the American author Ernest Hemingway. Quite a famous author. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and his most famous work is probably The Old Man and the Sea. And Hemingway said, if the author knows exactly what he is talking and writing about, if he has a good idea of everything and a clear imagination, then he does not need to describe all of this in detail in his novel, but it is sufficient if he provides some small glimpses into it, and the rest of it that is not explicitly mentioned, although all of that will still shine through, it will still be recognizable to the reader. In this regard, Hemingway said, "The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water." So the first use of this iceberg metaphor was in literature. This is called the iceberg theory, not iceberg model. So there is a distinction here, at least in English. In German, it is also called iceberg model. The next prominent use of the metaphor was in regard to Sigmund Freud. However, not by Sigmund Freud himself. The iceberg metaphor does not appear in Freud's own works, but it first appears several years after his death. It is not clear who started using it. Floyd Rooke and Philip Zimbardo are frequently mentioned in this regard. However, they apparently were not the first. And in regard to Freud, the iceberg metaphor is used for the relationship between the conscious aspects of our own psyche and the pre-conscious and unconscious aspects. So the conscious parts of our psyche that we can observe and that we are fully aware of, they make up the tip of the iceberg, and the pre-conscious and subconscious aspects that we are not consciously aware of, they make up the bottom part. Another prominent use of the metaphor was by Paul Watzlawick, and this is especially interesting to us because Watzlawick used the iceberg metaphor in regard to communication. I couldn't find out the exact source, so I don't know yet which book or article by Watzlawick this is described in, and I couldn't find it in Watzlawick's own words, but he used it to describe the difference between the content aspect and the relationship aspect of communication. In a similar way, we can also apply the metaphor to Schulz von Thun's 4 sides of a message that we discussed before. We have the factual information, self-revelation, relationship aspects, and the appeal. And in regard to the image of the iceberg, the factual information aspect would primarily be located at the tip, while self-revelation, relationship aspects, and appeal would primarily be located in the hidden lower part of the iceberg. I say primarily because there is no clear cut here, there is no sharp distinction. For example, imagine a situation where a child says to the mother, "Oh, the vase in the living room broke." This quite obviously means that the child broke them. However, it is not explicitly stated, so here we have a factual information that is below water, so to speak. And there are a lot of common phrases such as "I love you" or "please help me," where a lot of self-revelation, relationship information, or appeal is clearly and openly communicated. So there is no sharp distinction here, but it is a fluid transition. This is, by the way, a common mistake in regard to the iceberg metaphor that a sharp distinction is assumed where there is actually a fluid transition. Nowadays, the iceberg metaphor is used in a lot of different areas and different contexts. We already saw literature, psychology, communication. In the video description, I will provide an example for it being used in cultural studies, so another entirely different field. And in English, several articles I found used it in regard to understanding systems and systematic thinking. So there is, it seems, a popular trend where it is used as well. There are some problems in regard to the iceberg model. As you already know, we have this issue of the term iceberg model, where it is actually a metaphor that is used in a lot of different ways. We have some parts in its history that are a bit vague or unclear. We don't know who used the iceberg metaphor in regard to Freud's works first. As I said, I couldn't find a proper source for Watzlawick yet. And a lot of articles and videos that I had a look at during my research also have some vagueness or outright errors. For example, I found several where the iceberg model is attributed to Freud, which is obviously not correct, as we know by now. I found several that mix up Freud and Watzlawick articles with headlines like "Communicate better using Freud's iceberg model," and communication wasn't such a central topic for Freud. It was the signature topic of Watzlawick. So there is some mix-up. I also saw articles that referred to Freud in the headline, but the diagram then was labeled content aspect, relationship aspect, so it clearly referred to Watzlawick. So there is a lot of vagueness and mix-up here. Furthermore, the metaphor is not always applied in ways that make sense. What I frequently see in Germany, that it is used in regard to verbal and non-verbal communication, in a way like verbal communication is the tip of the iceberg, non-verbal is the hidden bottom part. And again, there is no clear distinction here, as we know from Schulz von Thun's 4 sides of a message. Verbal communication has a lot of invisible aspects as well. And on the other hand, nonverbal communication, body language, has a lot of signs and statements that are quite clear and explicit. For example, if someone is giving me the finger, I don't need a lot of interpretation to understand what he means. It is just as clear as if he had spoken the words. And finally, as I mentioned already, the iceberg metaphor is frequently mixed up with the Pareto principle. You can usually notice that if the 2080 numbers appear, then there is usually the Pareto principle involved, even though it often doesn't make sense. So if you encounter the iceberg metaphor, stay skeptical. Always ask yourself, does it really make sense to attribute those things to the tip of the iceberg and the bottom part of the iceberg, and check whether they assume a clear cut, a clear distinction, where there actually is a fluid transition. The same applies, by the way, if you see the Pareto principle, because this is also used frequently and not always in a way that really makes sense. By the way, on this channel, Only a small part of the views is generated by subscribers. So please subscribe to the channel, come to the tip of the iceberg. It's great there. You get a new exciting video about soft skill topics each week, such as next week when we discuss the 4 burners theory. Quite an interesting topic. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please like it. And feel free to leave some feedback in the comments. I'm always glad to hear from you. We will see each other next week. Until then, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.